Hi, welcome to this video on the context for Bayonet Charge by Ted Hughes. All images used in this PowerPoint are of the public domain. We're going to have a look at 3 key points of context. We're going to have a look at the poet, we're going to have a look at the bayonet charge itself, and we're going to refresh some information on World War I. Now, the poet Ted Hughes, in life, was 9 at the start of World War II, so it's very clear when we look at Bayonet Charge that his early teenage years were affected by war, so it's a subject he knows a lot about. His father also served in World War I, and this makes Bayonet Charge quite a very personal poem to him in a way. He's clearly writing from a personal viewpoint, as his father would have told him stories about the war. He was the poet laureate in his time, so he would have written poems that expressed particular views of things going on in the world. The soldier, being unnamed, could actually represent Hughes speaking for all soldiers that were involved in World War I. He was actually a nature poet by heart, and it's actually clear to see this in Bayonet Charge. He uses a lot of natural images, such as the yellow hare and the green hedge. A lot of Hughes' work reflects the dual nature of beauty and violence, and again we can see tons of violent images in this poem. So we need to know about a bayonet charge, and we first need to know that the bayonet is actually a knife or a dagger on the end of a rifle. Soldiers would use these to conserve ammunition, or in the event that they ran out of ammunition. World War I was the start of the use of bigger and better weaponry, and we can see this in the poem Bayonet Charge as it talks about the great explosions. Soldiers literally had to run through frightening conditions from one side of the battlefield to the other, all the while whilst they were being shot at, so you can see how frightening it was for them. Because charges only occurred when the opportunity presented itself, they weren't planned. The poem, starting in the way it does, shows us the suddenness of the charge, and it throws us straight into the action. So World War I, we've mentioned this before when we talked about exposure, but we'll refresh a couple of things. It was largely covered up by the media, as explained in Exposure, and the media tried to glorify it as a worthy cause, so they only showed the good sides of it. Many soldiers before the war were brainwashed or encouraged to die for their country by war and military service being held in high regard. The reality was much more shocking. So when people heard that war was about to break out, the media said it was positive and a very honourable thing to die for your country. But obviously when the soldiers actually got into the war, they found that that was kind of a reality that they weren't prepared for. It was a trench war. People had to go over the top to charge at an enemy, because although weapons were advancing in power, they weren't the full range weapons we have today. It was a brutal war. Lots of people died for various reasons. Exposure due to the long waiting periods, gunfire, explosions, etc. It was used as an example of the bloodiest and violent wars in history. The total killed in World War II was actually higher, but because of how horrific the conditions were and how the soldiers were treated and what actually happened to them, World War I was remembered as a much more aggressive and violent war. At least in World War II, most of the machines and weaponry did the fighting. So what's left? Try to revise 3 points that I've told you. For every quote that you look at, try to create a sentence that includes one of the 3 key points of information. For example, I'm going to use the quote, "In what cold clockwork," from the actual poem. Here, Hughes is actually telling us that the soldier is starting to question his morals, which could be reflective of the way the soldiers in World War I started to question the validity of the war. As we know, soldiers were told they were fighting for a just cause and that it was their duty to die, but the reality behind the actual war was far more grim and was covered up by the media. So writing a couple of sentences like that, just so that people know you are aware of the context behind the poem, can actually help get you a couple of extra marks, 6 in total in fact on any of the papers. Try to further your research on the 3 topics that we've discussed today. Try to talk about World War I, try to talk about Ted Hughes, and try to talk about the bayonet and the weapons that were used in World War I. Good luck.